what we're going to do now is I'm going to ask Eric Leader to mute everybody except for you and me and Eric. Okay. We're going to get started. I'm going to be interviewing you for about 20 minutes or so. And then we're going to be opening it up for discussion. How does that sound to you?
That sounds fabulous. Will you monitor comments or you?
Yeah, Eric and I will be taking care of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Eric, especially Eric. And by the way, I couldn't do this without Eric because I'm a technological idiot. So, luckily we have somebody like Eric who knows how to do this stuff, which is wonderful. So, Steph Ridgway, one of my favorite people in the whiskey world. You are one of the first product reps with whom I became friends. Okay, and it was every year, Binny's World of Whiskeys, especially when you were the Highland Park rep. Okay, and you were repping Highland Park for years, and it was wonderful. I want to tell everybody one of my favorite Steph Ridgway stories, which has to do with her creativity. So every year when I go to World of Whiskeys, when I see one of the reps whom I know and a product line that I know, I go up to them and I ask, so do you have anything new? And of course, Highland Park didn't. Highland Park didn't have a lot of new stuff. It was the same old every year. Great stuff, but the same old. And one year, I'm sure you remember this, you actually had beer at your table. And you decided that you were going to pair different Highland Park expressions with beer. And I thought that was just freaking awesome. So that was brilliant. That was creative, and I loved it. It was wonderful. Can you please tell us what you're drinking tonight, Steph?
Yes, actually, I am drinking a little dram of what has been actually one of my favorite whiskeys long before I figured out a way to make it pay my mortgage. And now I'm very fortunate to actually work for the distillery. But I'm drinking a little Old Pulteney tonight. And I'm actually drinking the 12-year-old.
Okay.
And I'm drinking it because it's about a nice, comfortable 80 degrees. So I'm on my patio.
Oh, nice.
I'm drinking it on a large format ice ball that I have made at home in a glass that says badass. Because, in these times, it pays to advertise. I feel like a badass right now. But this Old Pulteney 12, it's probably the workhorse or benchmark of the Old Pulteney range. And the 12 is bottled at 40 ABV, so it's nice and easy, and you put it on this big, large format ice ball, and it's a patio dram. So right. I've got my session whiskey right now. That's what I figured. I'm like, okay, I need to keep a sharp head for the questions that shall be fired
I understand
at
that, and watering it down a little bit with some melting ice and 80-degree weather, that's a good way to go. Actually,
patio whiskey.
Right. So Brett Pontani from Binny's actually introduced us to Old Pulteney 12 about 7 years ago. He and I have been hosting a fundraising whiskey tasting for my synagogue for, 18 years now. And he introduced us to Old Pulteney several years ago. And it's just been a great dram. I love it. It's wonderful. Of course, tonight I'm drinking your Huddart. Okay. Old Pulteney Huddart, which you introduced me to at Warehouse Liquors. And I'm actually this is the first actual question I'm going to ask you. So talk to me about age statement versus non-age statement whiskeys. You have there a 12-year-old.
Okay.
I have here something with no age statement.
Yes.
And it seems like more and more of the distilleries are coming out with non-age statement whiskeys. Can you talk a little bit about that trend?
Yes, happy to talk about that trend, and full disclosure and a little disclaimer before I get on to maybe explaining it. I have a very specific opinion about age statement versus non-age statement, and I might sit on the opposite side of some of your group's opinion, but I firmly believe, first and foremost, that if the liquid in the bottle is good, I'm not tied to a number. If it's good, I'll drink it. If I don't consider it to be good, I don't want to drink it. So, right. I think that when we look at age statement whiskeys, I think the first thing that everybody has to consider, and I know if we were having this conversation maybe 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago, it was all of a sudden it happened, and there was kind of like an undertone of the category enthusiasts such as yourself, like, oh, brands are just trying to, put not so good stuff in a bottle and, make some money. And, that may very well be true. I'm fortunate enough to never have worked for any of those brands.
Mm-hmm.
I work for brands that really, like I said, I've drank all the brands I've worked for long before I worked for them. So I feel good about saying this. But, what I think the non-age statement has done for the whiskey industry is it's sort of taken the shackles off of the master distiller and the master blender. Because, as you all well know, Whiskey 101, that number on the bottle, that 12-year-old number there, is the youngest malt that we're permitted to use to produce that whiskey.
Right.
Chances are good and very good. There's older whiskeys in there. Clearly, there's older whiskeys in there. But when you remove that number, you allow these artists, the conductors of the symphony to say, well, we have this 10-year-old or this 11-year-old or whatever the case may be that's stunning and it's ready, but we can't do it here. So we have to be, we have to wait. So, I think
Steph, can I stop you for
really,
1 second? Is that alarm near you, or is that alarm near Eric?
Oh, can you hear me out? No, that's me. That's
okay. I didn't. Okay, all right, that's fine. Your house isn't on fire, is it?
No, my house
Okay,
isn't
that's
on
good.
fire
All
at
right.
all. This is not something I hear every day where I live right now. So I don't know what's going on, and I
Okay.
apologize.
All right, that's good. No worries. I just wanted to make sure it was all good. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're all good. So at any rate,
so you're talking about the artists, letting the artists do what they do.
It's the artist, and the artist gets to choose the casks that are ready, and we know that we have a bottling plan, and we can do this. But also, and I always am a little bit, I would say, I'm hesitant to mention this, but we all look at whiskey as a very romantic thing, but there's also science to it, and there's reality and facts. 15 years ago, we could have never imagined in a million years that, especially here in America, we would be drinking whiskey like it was bathwater. Okay, I mean, so to say that the non-age statement was we're just trying to put something in a bottle to make money, yes, we're an industry. We do make money. We make a product that we need to sell. But that said, if distilleries, when I say people, distilleries are putting good liquid in a bottle, it shouldn't matter what the number on the bottle says. If you like it and it tastes good, you mentioned that I was formerly, part of the Highland Park organization. It was like when they launched Dark Origins.
Right.
We were one of the first ones to go, and people sort of raised an eyebrow, and some very reputable people, some writers were like, okay, here goes Highland Park. And then they took a sip, and it was almost like they couldn't help themselves.
Right.
They were like, oh, damn, this is good. So,
right. If it's good, it's good. All right.
Right.
So tell me about the Huddard. So tell me about the Huddard, because Huddard is named for the street on which Old Pulteney is located, right?
Yes. We're located on Huddard Street up in Wick, in this tiny little town on the very northern coast. We sit on the Caithness coast. So, if you walk 3 blocks outside of our distillery and you take one more step, you fall off a cliff into the North Sea. So
right.
that's
and you're far north. You're very, very far north, and you're Orkney.
Far north as you can go.
Right.
Well, you take a ferry ride to Kirkwall. It's about a 45-minute ferry ride, and it's tough. I've done it too. You're crossing the North Sea. Okay. But what we've done with this expression, it's really kind of cool. We've added something to the core range that's never really existed, where we've taken Pulteney, the classic Pulteney that is, aged up in a sea-soaked, windswept environment, and we've aged it in casks that have held very heavily peated malt previously. Right. So the malt is not peated, but the cask that it's sitting in.
Right, so it's finished. It's finished in a peated cask.
No, it's actually not finished. It's actually further matured. So it spends a more significant time in there. So it's, finished is like anything south of about 18 months, 2 years. Further maturation is a little over 2 years. So these malts spend a longer time in there. But I find that particular dram so interesting because we put something in the core range that we've never had before, and that's something that appeals to the peated whiskey aficionados, people that like a little bit of that earth, a little bit of that smoke, a little bit of that camphor that's never been there before. But for you really big smokeheads out there, and I know there's a big number amongst this group, this is what I could say could be your session whiskey, where you want a little bit of that, but you just want to hang out.
But you don't have a lot, right?
Right. We also bottle it at 46 ABV, and it's so clearly non-chill filtered, and it's still a natural color.
Got it. Now, I know that before this conversation, before we started here, we were talking a little bit about Ball Blair. And one thing that's interesting to me about Ball Blair, which, we both like, and by the way, for many of the people on here, you might not know, the person who introduced me to Ball Blair was Cantor Alberto Mizrahi. I was in his office one day, and he said that one of the congregants gave him a really nice bottle, and it was Ball Blair 97. Okay, the 1997 Ball Blair, which is wonderful. Right. But what's interesting about Ball Blair is that they were vintage. They were giving us vintage years instead of 80. So that also is fascinating. And am I correct that they're moving away from that now?
Oh, actually have moved away from it. So anybody that's out there looking to get some Ball Blair vintages, if you see it on the shelf, buy it, because that's all there is. So, we did this globally about, I want to say it was last March, maybe it was a year and a half ago. I'm a little fuzzy on the timeline. The timelines, everything just kind of fades into whatever right now.
Especially now.
Right, exactly. So, we took a little bit, I don't want to say, we had some very serious questions about why we were trying to do this. And the cold hard fact of the matter is, the Ball Blair Vintage series is only relatively recent, for maybe the past 20 years. Okay. Prior to that, Ball Blair was an age statement whiskey. Some of you may have actually hung out with me at Delilah's on occasion and helped me finish off a bottle of, oh God, it was like a Ball Blair 38. I think. Yeah,
wow.
I know that. I was
I wish
drinking
I were there that night.
Shriners, but it took me about 3 nights, but I drank it, and that was over a course of time. So Ball Blair has moved away from vintages. The cool thing about vintages were they were really cool if you understood them.
Okay.
But by and large, the walk and buy individual.
Yeah. Right.
And we're talking 10% of maybe even the whiskey community was like, well, wait, is this the first release or the second release? And while they were all spectacular, it was just really hard. So much so that we actually after a while, we started putting on the bottle when they were distilled and when they were bottled. So that was sort of our cheeky way. In fact, Paul, if you have that, you can find that on there. That was our cheeky way of saying, you want an age statement? Have a dram and do some math. Get back to me.
Nice. So can you tell me how you ended up in this place where you're making a career out of loving whiskey and spreading the word, and really how you became what you call whiskey chick?
The whiskey chick. Well, okay. It's not a very convoluted story.
Okay.
It's pretty simple. I have been a fan of Scotch whiskey, and for anybody who's interested in knowing this, the person that got me into Scotch whiskey was my mother. Okay, nice. My mom was a Scotch whiskey drinker. Yeah, right.
Nice.
And she, kind of, and I was clearly of legal, responsible drinking age.
Of course.
But yeah, my mom got me into whiskey, and I started off in blends, and I still have an affinity for blends because I think every whiskey has a time and a place. It doesn't need to always be about single malt. It goes back to me, what's good is good, what you like, and it's all about your palate. And I was a restaurateur for 25 years. I worked for some very, very, very big brand names in the restaurant. I mean, names that you all would know if I told you. I was general manager, sales directors, all this stuff. And when I decided to leave that and I decided to venture out on my own to do some consulting work in Washington, D.C., where I was living at the time, I said, well, I needed to go find restaurants to help them small boutique or independents that really didn't have the money to have like a director of marketing or director of sales, that I could be that person for you on a contingency basis. So I was doing that. And part of what that was finding really good strategic partnerships with them to help them build their brand and build it. And where do you find strategic partnerships? If you're a restaurant, you look to liquor companies.
Right, exactly.
And having a lot of liquor, companies like that I had worked with in my bigger brand life, I just kind of happened. And then I sort of stumbled into rum. I was working as
really?
rum.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was for about 2 years. I was the Mid-Atlantic brand ambassador, which I guess encompassed DC, Maryland, and Virginia, of Mount Gay rum. And I love Mount Gay rum. I was a Mount Gay rum drinker. I still, to this day, if I'm not in spirits world, if I'm not drinking whiskey, I'm sipping on rum. I love it. I always have. And then the bottom of the world, the market dropped out in about 2008, if you recall, back when everything went
I remember very well.
The other hell in a handbasket. So now we're on to 2. And I said, people can't afford to pay, businesses can't afford to pay for their own staff, much less an independent consultant. So I said, I'm going to move. So I just called some recruiters. I said, I got to move. I want to go. And I got a call back, and they said to me, what do you think about Scotch? And what do you think about Chicago?
Nice.
And I said, check and mark. And I had never, Chicago was always on my radar of a place I wanted to live. I'd never been there. I'd never even set foot there. But I'm like, I'm in. Sign me up. So that's when I became the famous grouse girl in Chicago.
Famous grouse is such a wonderful blend. I mean, when you think of the components that go in there, and actually I remember several years ago, Famous Grouse came out with the Famous Grouse 18. Okay, when it was, and that was damn good stuff, and it was reasonably priced too.
Well, funny story. We'll digress. I'm going to touch on that. So my very first Whiskey Fest in Chicago, and this was in 2010, April of 2010, right? So I'm there as the grouse girl, and we had 2 national ambassadors with me, the McAllen and the Highland Park ambassador with me at that time. And I had a table, and they each had a table. And they said, we need to put you in the middle of us, because if you're not, nobody will pay attention to you. And I was sort of a punk. I was like, well, they'll pay attention to me. I'm like, and they're like, no, trust us. So there I am. But knowing what I knew about Famous Grouse 18, I just started talking to people. I'm like, well, this is a blend of Highland Park and McAllen, and it's like the best of both of those 18. And a magical thing happened. People who were there to accost Martin and I can't remember at that time the McAllen National Ambassador's name, just sort of left his table and came to me, because this bottle retailed for $65. It was a pure malt. It was a fatted malt, right? You might have been one of those guys.
Actually, I actually think, was that one of the years the World of Whiskeys was held at the South Loop store? Right. Yes. I remember that. Okay. I remember that very, very well. I think it might have been the
last year that it was held down at South Loop.
Right.
Where I thought we were all going to just die because we were all just crammed in there like crazy.
Right. I remember. Well, it was before that, it had been at the catacombs. But okay, that's great. That's a wonderful story. So that's probably where you and I met probably that year. I got into it.
And I moved to Chicago, and this is not even because I'm speaking to Chicagoans, but Chicago just embraced me, and I embraced them. And it was a great city, and I loved it. I never my move to New York came because of the job, and I was going to stay in Chicago the rest of my life. Loved it.
Oh,
that's how I got this start. The famous grouse girl in Chicago, all because of a global economic turndown, and I took a shot, and Chicago took a shot on me.
You posted a great picture on Facebook when you moved to the old Pulteney team of you. I think you were shoveling barley. Okay, it was. I remember it was something like they were training you or something, and they were training you.
I've hard worked in all the distilleries. I don't know. I did a Malt Angel, but I was also that one I did.
Was that at Anok? It might have been at Anok.
Anna took me to our at Boards, which is who we get we don't get our barley from, but a lot of our malt from, we get some of it, Scottish barley, but that's one of the biggest barley suppliers. Like they do like actually big beer companies and stuff. But yeah, he took me there and I'd never done a malt angel. So I took a dive into like 10 million tons. And in my foolishness, it was unmalted barley. So it was just like raw agriculture that I was like flailing around in. And then all I could think of was like, damn, the sniffer beagles are going to get me when I try. Have you ever been in touch with agriculture? No. And I'm shaking out my clothes.
You must have had dust in your clothes for days.
Oh, I was a mess, but I couldn't help myself. 10 million tons of barley and I'm laying in it, just having the time of my life.
That's wonderful. So I'm going to ask you a few more serious questions before we open it up to the crowd here for questions. You said that right before this call that you had been talking to Mike Miller at Delilah's. Okay.
Yes.
Obviously, you have many contacts in the industry, many bars. What can we do to help them now? I mean, we're not able to go there yet, and there's still social distancing. How are they holding up, and how's Mike holding up?
Well, Mike's holding up well. I think the best thing to do if you're able, and this is in no way, if you can't, you can't. I totally understand it, but there's still the ability to buy gift cards, so they have a bit of a stream of income.
Okay.
And for me personally, and again, like I buy the gift cards, and I just if I have a little bit of money, I buy them. I don't intend to use them because I want to come back and do it. If you can help them, visit them and buy some gift cards. If you ever see the Delilah's folks, posting, and this is by no means taking away from any other of the amazing whiskey bars or clubs in Chicago, because the relationships are there. If they're in a competition, vote for them. If you have a favorite, vote for them. And maybe even most importantly is just reaching out. If you've got a contact with them, if you're friends on Facebook, if you're friends on Instagram, with Sally and Mike, with Aaron over at Fountainhead, or the Peter down at a Franklin Room, or whomever that you can't, send them a note. And if they offer to go. If you can, go.
So, have you spoken to Gene from Warehouse Liquors since the shall we say the horrible evening that he had with the riots?
Yes. Well, I haven't physically spoken to Gene. We've emailed, but I have talked to Zach and I have talked to Frank.
Okay.
So, yeah, on Sunday night when I saw that there was a bit of a post, I immediately picked up the phone and I talked to Zach. And this was less than 24 hours, so there was still just a lot of crazy headspace and talking, and then we're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. I talked to Frank that night, and I said, can you give me any indication? And he was still very much overwhelmed that this outpour of support from their customers and their suppliers and their contacts and whomever. Gene is Gene. We know Gene. If you've been to Warehouse Liquors, you've been, and if you know him, you've been on the receiving end of his hospitality.
Right.
He is quintessentially one of the best guys in the business, and proving to be one of the most resilient. If you're on Facebook, there's a post where you can actually go watch the camera stream video of the
they posted it today. They posted it today.
It was hard. I watched it, and full disclosure, I couldn't watch it to the end because, and I'm getting a little misty here because of just the time I've spent there and how well I know them. But that said, Gene is Gene. He is full steam ahead with rebuilding. The saddest part is some of the stock that he has was clearly unreplaceable.
Oh, it's irreplaceable, and some of the stuff was irreplaceable. He was like he's like a museum curator, with some of the stuff, the way he built the collection.
Yes, Exactly. And this is to, again, take nothing away from the 11 Bennies that were demolished and trashed as well. Jeans was just a little bit more publicized. But he's also, if you can, and I'm not advocating for one against the other, but he's got a GoFundMe set up for a warehouse. So if you're able on any level, but Gene being Gene, he's picked himself up. I think the stitches are already removed
Nice.
from the injury that he sustained. And this is, I don't know how that's possible. He got stitches. Knowing Gene, he probably just like he pulled a combat like foxhole move and like ripped them out and said, I gotta buy some barrels. But that's our
Nice.
Gene. So
Right.
I think to wrap this whole piece of how can we help your community, just checking on them, and when these guys and these men and these women hear your voices, it does a world of good.
Got it. That's great. Well, on that note, I'm sure that there are a lot of people here who have questions about your whiskeys and your story. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to turn it over to Eric for moderating this. I know that there have been some things posted on the chat, so I'll be quiet for a few minutes. Eric, if you can take it away. People, if you have questions, you can put them on the chat. You can raise your hands. Eric will take it from here.
Anybody have an initial question?
I've got a bunch more if nobody else does.
I was going to say, so Steph, what is your favorite rum?
My favorite rum?
Yeah.
Honest to God, and I know I always must sound like a used car salesman because I talk about brands that I've worked for, but the reality of the situation is I went to work for brands that I loved. It wasn't vice versa. And Mount Gay is my favorite rum. It always has been. I remember interviewing for the job, and the brand director said to me, I'm like, I live in DC, and he goes, oh, Mount Gay? I go, yeah, there's a bottle of it in my liquor cabinet. And he said, oh, you're the one person in Washington, D.C. drinking Mount Gay rum. I'm like, clearly I am. But I just love that it's from the island of Barbados. They have a range. The Mount Gay Eclipse, which is their core, I just adore it. I adore it with soda and a lime. I adore it to just sip. I adore it in eggnog at Christmas time. But there's so many good ones out there. If you're if you ever do rum, there's the Brugal is a lovely rum. The 1888 is a badass sipping rum that rivals the Kappa on any level. But it's also probably, I don't know, $20 cheaper or less expensive. I never like to use the word cheap when I'm talking about good spirits. Plantation pineapple, like plantation rum is out of this world, but the pineapple, which actually maturates pineapple in the distillate before it bottles, that stuff is like, you don't need any other pina colada ingredients when you're drinking that. You just pour that in a glass over an ice cube and you're transported. So I would say Plantation, Brugal, and Mount Gay being my go-to everyday rum.
Nice.
Nice, thank you.
Very, very nice. All right, next question. All right, I've got another question for you. Anok, talk to me a little. When we were at that tasting, okay, at Warehouse Liquors, Anok seems to be one of those whiskeys that a lot of people don't know about. And you had an 18 there, a sherry aged 18, and it just seemed to be half the price of other really good sherry aged 18s. Why? How is it that a whiskey that's that good goes under the radar?
Yeah, you know what? $64,000 question. How is a whiskey that good under the radar? But I think it just, as it relates to just the Noctu distillery, and the Noctu is the name of the distillery, Anok's the name of the whiskey. It's where we are. We're clearly an enthusiast brand. Like, if you don't know, I mean, there's not been a ton of like big brand build up, not a ton of like marketing dollars behind it, but also we've managed to manage our stock very well. So we're able to produce this, and for clarification, the Knock 18 is not 100% ex-sherry. There is a portion of ex-bourbon cask in there,
Mhm.
but it's very heavily sherry. So,
Mhm.
you know, when you relate it to maybe a Macallan that is 100% ex-sherry,
Mhm.
you know, it's maybe, you know, a term, you know, you take a look at, you know, what the cask, you know, cost is to do that. But, you know, it all of IBHL or internet or Inverhouse brands, you know, we invest in a solid wood program. But, you know, how this stuff managed to go under the radar is that, you know, it's still a best kept secret. So, you know, maybe you, and from where I sit, my vantage point across my brands,
Mhm.
we're everybody's best kept secret, but I want 100,000 more people in on the secret. But as soon as those 100,000 more people come in, right, then we're not as affordable as you might like us to be. So, but you know, I'll take a little thrashing over the price for saying, you know, oh my God, everybody loves it. But the people who love Enoch, yeah, that Enoch 18 is that spectacular. And here's a tip for your money, a pro tip. One of my top 10 favorite drams, and it's not super easy to come by because it's been archived, is the Knock 22. You want to pour yourself one of the most stunning whiskeys you'll ever, and I played fast and loose with
Oh,
the first
Michael.
bottle.
Okay, Michael Nolan is going to his shelf right now. I saw that. As soon as you said knock 22, he jumps up. Nolan, do you
All
have
my
it?
Knock 22, I put on my restrictions in my storage unit so I wouldn't drink it. I think I only have 2 bottles left. And
Nolan, do you have
actually
some?
one of the
I know I have it somewhere up there. I just have to find it.
I think,
And
in fact,
believe it
one
or
of the
not,
bottles that
I
the
got it
one,
at just a stupid price at Binny's.
It's
the
'cause-
one that I got to the point where they didn't even have it for me at the staff shop in the UK. It doesn't
Wow.
exist anymore, right? So the last one I actually got was I bought off the shelf from Gene.
God, that's hilarious. So, you know, you
Yeah.
mentioned something that actually I don't want to ask you about here. Being a product rep in the time of social distancing. Okay. How are you doing your job and how are you doing your budgeting for next year?
Well, next year is like a unicorn. We're like assuming it's going to be amazing and great. Well, how I'm doing my job is a lot of this, right? You know, my role is director of education for
Mhm.
Inverhouse or International Beverage. So a lot of it is this, but you know, from a you know, like I said way in the beginning of it, there's some non-romantic sides to this industry. You know,
Mhm.
one of the non-romantic sides, but very, very important sides is the commercial aspect. And we have just recently uh, aligned with a new importer in the United States.
Okay.
So we used to be part of 375 Park Avenue Spirits, which was a part of the Sazerac family.
Okay.
And now we're aligned with Hoteling, which is an amazing importer. Some of you may be familiar with the brands that they deal with. I think Cavalon, you know, these
Mhm.
guys.
Yeah. Mhm.
And a variety. I mean, but we're sort of rounding out their portfolio of Scotch whiskey. So I have a lot of this really non-romantic stuff on my plate right now, which
Sure.
is pricing ladders and aligning and I'm doing a lot of distributor trainings, all virtually, of course. So, you know, I'm very, very fortunate to have, because of folks like you know, I've got a little bit of recognizability that
Mhm.
they're like, oh, we want to talk, you know, and I've tried to be very conscientious on social media. You know, I want to be, you know, if anybody follows me as Whiskey Chick, you know, there's got to be a balance between, you know, being like socially aware and whiskey aware. So I just
Mhm.
kind of do the best I can between, you know, my job and whatever else there is out there to talk about. But I always am a big fan outside of just this. One of my things is I'm picking up the phone, talking to people. How are you doing? Where's your headspace? I don't care. Just
Right.
to Gil, like you, like, how are you doing? Like,
Right.
let's talk.
Right.
Let's have phone. So that
Right.
when the normalcy does come back, I'm just, you know, I want it to be like we maybe didn't skip a beat. We just talked like we always talk.
Right. So has anybody ever given you any shit for the name Whiskey Chick? I know it's not exactly a politically correct title there.
I picked that name.
I know you
That's
did,
mine.
but I know you did, but has anybody ever given you any shit for it?
No, mostly they're jealous that I got it. They're like, "How'd you get that name?" And I'm like, "I just picked it." I'm like, "I'm Whiskey Chick," and they're like, "Are you the Whiskey Chick?" I'm like, "Well, I am the Whiskey Chick, but on social media, I'm just Whiskey Chick." I'm like, if you want to, I'm like, whatever. I'm like, I can't even. Yeah, no. Like I said, mostly they're just like, "That's so cool. How'd you get that?" Like, I am a Whiskey Chick.
What scotch did your mother like to drink?
She was a blended drinker, so we drank. She was a big fan of Johnny Walker Black. Was her go-to dram.
Great stuff.
And yeah, and then I was the one that just started venturing out. So I was like, well, here, try Pinch and try J&B and try, all of these, what have you. And it's so funny. She was a whiskey drinker. As she's gotten older, her tastes have evolved. She's not a whiskey drinker anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, it's too boozy. I'm like, boozy? But then
it's
here,
scotch.
fun story. It's like, I can't believe now here I am. I'm sitting in the seat of like having anything at my fingertips that I could share with you, and you don't want anything to do with it. But the one dram that she took a sip of and went, well, that's pretty good, was the Highland Park 40-year-old.
Oh,
I was like, of course.
Whoa. If you have good taste, you have good taste. I mean,
I was
that's...
like, yeah, and she also liked the Louis Tray. I'm like, okay, you know what? Enough. I'm like, I can't keep you in that. I'm like, I can hook you up with some good 25 and 30-year-old stuff, but I can't ball at that level on a regular basis.
No.
So, Mom, just drink your vodka.
Nice. My father-in-law, he loves his Smirnoff. For him, he always has to have Smirnoff. That's just what he loves.
My mom's drink of choice these days, and I actually turned her onto it because I thought it was a joke. My mom loves coffee. My mom drinks coffee. She eats coffee ice cream, coffee. So about 20 years ago, I guess, when they launched, when I was working for Mount Gay Rum, the distributorship in Maryland secured the wholesale rights to Van Gogh vodka, and they make a double espresso vodka.
Oh wow!
Which is it's good. It's coffee flavored and it's caffeinated. Just what we need at midnight. Caffeinated. I need caffeinated food at midnight. I need to go home. But I said it to her, and she mixed it with iced coffee, and that's her cocktail of choice now.
To mix it with iced coffee?
Double espresso vodka and iced coffee. Yeah, my mom's a hummingbird eventually.
Wow.
Actually.
She must have been. I mean, well, how was her heart after that?
My mom's a former Marine, so she's pretty tough. No, she's tougher. So yeah, she drinks big double espresso vodka and iced coffee.
That's a good way to wake up.
Yeah, seriously. So
well,
Paul,
that's a good way to not go to sleep. Somehow she makes it work.
Right. So of course, Paul Letko from Few. Paul now has a cold. It's his cold brew. Okay, it's he has his it's a bourbon, I believe, with some cold brew coffee. So if you haven't had that yet, it's actually quite good stuff. And
well, Paul and I need to connect. Maybe there's a little horse trade we can do here. That sounds like something I might like.
It's actually quite good stuff. It is quite good stuff.
Awesome.
So it's 7:42 here. Out of everybody's respect for everybody's time, I just want to know: does anybody else here have any other questions before I sum it up here with Steph?
I saw.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the chat left, Eric?
Nope.
There are a few people talking about the new age, the no age statement stuff. It's interesting. I mean, it's some people like it, some people don't like it. The non-age statement.
That's
Who's the
okay.
distiller that makes the coffee vodka? My wife wants to know.
Hey, that's the
sorry.
coffee vodka. Hey, we're all amongst friends. This is the shut up. It's Van Gogh.
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh vodka, double espresso, and I will deny this promotion in a court of law.
There was no
You can buy it
promotion.
at
Nothing was
Binny's.
promoted. I heard nothing. I just, I picked up
No, no.
something about vodka and I thought
Binny's.
Benny's.
Eric, you need to
Binny's.
edit that out when you release this, okay?
Yeah.
yeah, you can edit that out.
So, Steph, when do you think we're going to see you next year in Chicago?
The very freaking minute they say I can come see you. The very freaking minute. You guys don't understand. When I left Chicago, part of the deal was, moving to New York was that I could get back to Chicago whenever I wanted. And of course I did. I
Yeah,
mean,
you've been
I
here a
was
lot.
there.
Yeah.
I was always there 4 or 5, 6 times a year. Sometimes I'd just show up and be like, I'm going to go. I'll just be at Franklin Room or Delilah's. Come meet me. But so the very second that I can get back there is when I'm going to get back there.
Got it. I like that answer.
I mean,
That's a great answer.
It was, the one thing I think we can probably, hopefully look forward to is in the fall
Mhm.
with, if you guys had plans on attending Whiskey and Barrel Night, if you
Which
do
one?
that,
Which one's that?
Dave Sweet's show, Whiskey and Barrel Night.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. We committed to do that. So that's looking like it's going to be in the fall. He doesn't have a date set yet because he's there. I don't know what the deal is with Whiskey Fest. And I don't know if we're actually participating. I have to evaluate some things there, but it doesn't take a festival to get me back to Chicago. It just takes a bunch of people for me to hang out and say what I want to drink whiskey. And when I do come back, Gil, I know you talked a lot about whiskeys and sponsoring your synagogues and whatnot. I did quite a bit of that when I was in Chicago when I was with Highland Park and Famous Grouse up there in Highland Park. So happy to do anything.
Are you telling me that there are Jews who live up in Highland Park? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Well, that particular enclave actually named
Don't
me
tell
the
anyone.
whiskey. I was the whiskey shiksa. So
Nice.
That's a
not
beautiful
if
way
I
to
jump
end
on
it.
the whiskey chick.
That is a beautiful, beautiful way to end this. Eric,
Do
can
you
you do
reserve
me a
that handle
favor?
on Twitter as well?
I probably need to trademark that because that was badass.
Yeah,
I'm like,
you got to get
whatever.
it. Whiskey Shiksa, you got to grab that one.
Yeah, as soon
On
as you
that
can.
note, Eric, can you do me a favor? Unmute everybody. Everybody, pour yourself the rest and a little bit more, another dram here. And just like all of us to raise a little toast
That can't be right.
to our lovely and knowledgeable guest and generous guest, Steph Ridgway. Steph,
Cheers.
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here,
Well,
here. This was the
Kind to
most
everybody.
fun on a Monday night
I am.
ever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you know
fine.
what? It'll. All I can say is that it'll be more fun when we can do it in person, and let's
Amen.
hope that that's soon. So, Steph, thank you so much.
Peace to that. Thank you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
Thank
And
you.
Eric, thanks again for helping us out for running this as expertly as you always do. Thank you very much, everybody. Our next one coming up, Paul, I love that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next one coming up, I think, is in
Thank
2
you.
weeks. It's with Paul Hutko from Few. So we have that one coming up, and I'll be sending out information about that. So again, thank you very much, everybody. Good night.
Cheers.
Bye.
Peace.
Good night.
Bye, Latov.
Woo. Hey, Lynn. Oh,